She pretended to love a millionaire to save her mother, but a hidden letter changed it all. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. A young woman, desperate to save her sick mother, found herself in a situation no one would expect. She agreed to marry a millionaire for his money. But what happened next changed everything. Let's meet the main character. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the small envelope in her hands. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing a letter that had the power to change her life. She had never been the kind of person to make rash decisions, but this was different. Her mother was sick, and the hospital bills were piling up. Emily knew that if she didn't act fast, she would lose the only family she had left. That's when she received the call. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, collected, almost too perfect. "I can help," the man had said. "Marry me, and I'll take care of everything. No questions asked. Your mother will get the best treatment money can buy." Emily felt the weight of his words. At first, she didn't know what to think. But when she thought about her mother, how fragile her health had become, the decision seemed almost obvious. She had no choice. The millionaire, Daniel Hayes, was everything she had ever dreamed of in a man. Tall, handsome, successful. But there was one problem. He was offering a marriage of convenience. No love, just a contract. Emily didn't care about love. She needed to save her mother. So she agreed. But as the days passed and she spent more time with Daniel, something began to shift. The more she got to know him, the harder it became to keep up the pretense. She couldn't deny the connection she felt. But she had made a promise, and she couldn't afford to break it. The day of the wedding arrived, and Emily stood before him, her heart pounding. She was about to marry a man she barely knew, all for the sake of her mother. But as she glanced down at the envelope in her hand, she remembered why she was doing this. She had made a deal, and she intended to see it through. Little did she know that one letter she had opened would change everything. The letter contained a secret that would tear down the walls she had built around her heart. Emily had no idea what she was about to discover, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Stay tuned to find out how this story unfolds. As the days passed after their agreement, Emily's life began to change in ways she never expected. She had moved into Daniel's mansion, a sprawling estate that felt like a palace compared to her cramped apartment. The luxury was overwhelming, and while it should have felt like a dream, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the size of the house or the fancy decor. It was the fact that every room, every corner of this place felt empty. The silence weighed on her, a constant reminder that this wasn't real. The marriage was supposed to be a business transaction, but as the days stretched on, Emily found herself becoming more drawn to Daniel. She knew she couldn't let her guard down, though. This was all for her mother's health, nothing more. Or at least, that's what she kept telling herself. Daniel was kind enough, though distant. He never pushed her for anything more than what they had agreed upon. He kept his distance emotionally, and Emily did the same. She had no interest in him beyond the agreement. But still, there were moments when she would catch him looking at her, moments when his gaze lingered just a little too long, and she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest. She hated herself for feeling anything. It was supposed to be simple, just a way to get her mother the treatment she needed. But somewhere along the way, things had started to feel more complicated. One evening, Daniel invited her to a charity gala. It was an important event for his company, and as his wife, she was expected to attend by his side. Emily didn't have anything to wear that would be appropriate for such a high-profile event. But Daniel had anticipated this and had already arranged for a stunning evening gown to be delivered to her. It was beautiful, sleek, elegant, and perfect for the occasion. As she dressed, she couldn't help but feel like a different person. The transformation was complete. She was no longer the waitress struggling to make ends meet. She was now the wife of a millionaire, a woman who belonged in this world. But that thought brought with it a new wave of guilt. She wasn't really Daniel's wife. She was playing a role. As they arrived at the gala, Emily felt out of place among the glamorous guests. She stood next to Daniel, who was charming and confident as he greeted business partners and old friends. Emily stood quietly by his side, smiling when appropriate, but inside, she felt a deep sense of disconnect. She wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't her life. Then, as the night went on, something unexpected happened. They were introduced to a group of Daniel's colleagues. One of them, a woman named Rachel, was particularly kind to Emily. She asked her about her background, about her interests, and for a brief moment, Emily felt like she could be herself. Rachel's warmth was a stark contrast to the cold, distant atmosphere of the event. She made Emily feel seen. As the evening drew to a close, Daniel pulled Emily aside. "You did well tonight," he said, his voice low, almost too sincere. Emily looked up at him, her heart racing. She had been playing this role for days, but hearing him speak to her like that made her question everything. She wasn't sure why, but she wanted to believe that there was something real between them. But she couldn't. She reminded herself that she was just pretending, that this was all part of the deal. The next morning, as Emily sat at the breakfast table, she couldn't help but reflect on the night before. Was it possible that she was starting to care for Daniel? Was it possible that this marriage of convenience was slowly becoming something more? And what about that hidden letter? The one she had discovered the night before, tucked away in Daniel's desk. The letter was from his late mother, written years ago, and it was addressed to Daniel himself. She had opened it in a moment of curiosity, and the words inside shocked her. The letter revealed that Daniel's mother had always intended for him to marry for love, not convenience. It seemed that she had wanted him to find someone who truly cared for him, someone who could heal the wounds left by his past. The letter changed everything for Emily. Was this the key to understanding Daniel? Was it possible that he, too, was looking for something more than just a business arrangement? She didn't know, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had uncovered something important. As the day wore on, Emily knew that she had to make a decision. She had agreed to this marriage to save her mother, but now, the lines between obligation and emotion were starting to blur. She had never expected to fall for Daniel, but somewhere along the way, she had. Now, with the letter in hand, Emily was left to wonder, could she continue to pretend? Or would the truth come out, forcing her to choose between her heart and her promise? Only time would tell. The next few days were filled with a sense of unease that Emily couldn't shake. The letter from Daniel's late mother still weighed heavily on her mind, and the growing feelings she had for him made her question everything. She had come into this marriage with only one goal in mind, to save her mother. But now, as the days passed, she found herself torn between her promise and the emotions that were beginning to surface. Daniel, for his part, remained the same. He was distant, polite, but distant all the same. His kindness toward her was undeniable, but it never crossed the line into something more personal. It was as if he was keeping a part of himself hidden from her, just as she was hiding a part of herself from him. Emily tried to push these thoughts aside. She had a responsibility to her mother, and that was all that mattered. But when Daniel invited her to another charity event, this time a more intimate gathering with some of his closest friends and business partners, Emily felt a surge of anxiety. She had been to grand events before, but this one felt different. She would be alone with Daniel for an entire evening, away from the distractions of the larger crowds. As she prepared for the evening, Emily found herself standing in front of the mirror, adjusting her dress, fixing her hair, and wondering how she had gotten here. She wasn't just pretending anymore. The lines between their arrangement and real feelings were becoming blurred, and it terrified her. When she arrived at the event, Daniel was already there, greeting guests with his usual calm composure. Emily stood by his side, watching as he charmed everyone in the room, effortlessly moving from one conversation to the next. But tonight, something was different. Daniel seemed to be paying more attention to her, noticing the way she shifted nervously, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. He asked her if she was okay, a simple question, but one that made her heart skip a beat. She smiled, assuring him that she was fine, but inside, she was anything but fine. As the night wore on, Emily felt herself slipping further into confusion. The deeper they went into their charade, the harder it became to keep her emotions in check. And then, as if fate had a hand in this, they found themselves alone on the balcony of the venue, away from the noise of the party. The cool evening breeze made Emily shiver, but Daniel was there, standing close enough to offer his warmth without saying a word. There was something about the way he looked at her, something that made her want to tell him everything. But she couldn't. She had a secret, one that would change everything. "Are you happy, Emily?" Daniel asked, his voice soft, almost vulnerable. Emily blinked, caught off guard by the question. Happy? How could she answer that? She wasn't sure what happiness meant anymore. All she knew was that she was stuck in a web of promises and lies, trying to do what was right while her heart was pulling her in a different direction. I'm doing what I need to do," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "For my mom." Daniel didn't press further, but his eyes softened. There was something behind those eyes, something that made Emily feel like he understood, like he knew exactly what she was going through. And for the first time since they had started this arrangement, Emily felt the walls around her heart begin to crack. They were standing there, two people who had nothing in common except a need for survival. But in that moment, it felt like they were connected by something more. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Emily went through the motions, smiling when needed, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation on the balcony. Could Daniel feel the same way? Was it possible that he, too, was struggling with this arrangement? When they returned to the mansion that night, Emily was exhausted, not just from the event, but from the emotional toll of pretending. She slipped into bed, the sheets cool against her skin, and stared at the ceiling, unable to quiet the thoughts racing through her mind. As she drifted off to sleep, a thought lingered in the back of her mind. Maybe, just maybe, Daniel wasn't as indifferent as she had thought. And maybe, just maybe, the hidden letter wasn't the only secret that would change everything. The days after the gala were a blur for Emily. Her mind was consumed with the moments she had shared with Daniel, the way he looked at her, the way he asked her if she was happy. It felt as if the walls between them were slowly crumbling, and yet, Emily knew she had to keep her distance. She had made a promise, and the last thing she wanted was to complicate things by getting caught up in feelings that didn't belong in this arrangement. The letter had changed everything, but it had also added a layer of confusion to her already conflicted emotions. She still couldn't understand why Daniel's mother had written those words in the letter. Had Daniel known about it? Did he feel the same pull she did? The questions gnawed at her, but she refused to give in to the temptation to find out more. Her mother's health was still her priority. That's what she kept telling herself. One afternoon, Daniel invited her to a private dinner at his penthouse. It was just the two of them, a quiet evening away from the prying eyes of his world. Emily tried to push her nerves aside, reminding herself that it was just a dinner, nothing more. But when she arrived, she was surprised by the warmth and intimacy of the setting. The penthouse was lit by soft candles, the table set with fine china and crystal glasses, everything perfectly arranged. It felt like something out of a dream, but this was her reality now. She was a part of Daniel's world, and that meant playing the role of his wife, even if it was only for show. As they sat down to dinner, Emily tried to focus on the food, on the pleasant conversation. But there was a tension in the air, something unspoken but palpable between them. Daniel asked her about her mother, about her childhood, and for a moment, Emily allowed herself to open up. She spoke about her mother's illness, about the sacrifices she had made to care for her family, and how grateful she was for the chance to help her. Daniel listened intently, his expression softening as she spoke. It was the first time he had really shown interest in her life, beyond the contract they had signed. Emily caught herself, realizing how much she had shared. She quickly changed the subject, but the moment had already passed. The evening continued, and for the first time in weeks, Emily felt a sense of connection with Daniel. It was subtle, but it was there. They were no longer just strangers bound by a contract. They were two people who, perhaps, were starting to understand each other. As the night came to an end, Daniel walked Emily to the door. His hand brushed against hers, and for a fleeting second, it felt like there was more to their relationship than either of them had allowed themselves to acknowledge. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I enjoy our time together, Emily." His words sent a flutter through her chest, and she struggled to find a response. What was she supposed to say? She couldn't let herself get carried away, not now. "It was nice," she said, her voice steady. "I'll see you tomorrow." As she stepped out into the cool night air, Emily couldn't help but feel conflicted. She had come into this marriage with one goal in mind, but now, with each passing day, she found herself becoming more and more drawn to Daniel. She had to remind herself of why she was here. It was for her mother, not for love. But the more she fought against it, the harder it became to ignore the feelings that were bubbling to the surface. The next day, Emily received a call from Daniel's lawyer. It was unexpected, but the message he left was even more so. Daniel would like to see you. It's about your mother. Emily's heart skipped a beat. What could Daniel want now? Was something wrong with her mother's treatment? She rushed over to his office, her mind racing with questions. When she arrived, Daniel was already waiting for her, his face serious but kind. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, he began. About your mother. And I want to help more. I know our arrangement was for the treatment, but I think we can do more. Emily stared at him, unsure of what he meant. More? How could he possibly do more? But before she could ask, he handed her an envelope, just like the one that had changed everything before. This is for you, he said, his tone unreadable. Take a look. Emily hesitated, then slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a check, a large one, enough to cover her mother's treatment for the next several months. But that wasn't what shocked her the most. There was a note attached, one that seemed almost like a confession. I know this isn't part of the deal, but I want to make sure your mother gets the best care. And I want to make sure you have everything you need, Emily. The words left her speechless. This wasn't just about a contract anymore. Daniel wasn't just offering financial help. He was offering something deeper, something more genuine. For the first time, Emily realized that Daniel wasn't just keeping up his end of the bargain. He was actually starting to care. And in that moment, everything changed. Emily sat in the quiet of Daniel's office, staring at the check in her hands. Her mind was racing. She had come to this moment hoping to secure her mother's treatment. But now, everything felt different. Daniel's gesture was so much more than she had expected. She had been prepared for the financial help. But this was something more personal, more real. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about something deeper, something she couldn't ignore. As she glanced up at Daniel, she could see the sincerity in his eyes, the way he was watching her with a mixture of concern and something else, something she couldn't quite place. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice shaky. Daniel took a step closer, his presence comforting but also overwhelming. You don't have to say anything, he said softly. I just wanted to help. Your mother's health is important to me, and I know this isn't part of the deal, but I care about you, Emily. The words hit her like a wave. Care about her? She had never expected to hear those words from him, not in this arrangement, not when everything had started out so transactional. But here they were, in a moment where things were no longer as clear-cut as they once seemed. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't want to complicate things. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, a way to save her mother. But the feelings she had been trying to suppress were growing stronger, and it was becoming harder to ignore them. She had to make a choice, a decision that would change everything. Could she continue with the plan, or was there a part of her that was starting to hope for something more? I appreciate everything you've done, Daniel, she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. But I need to think. I didn't come into this expecting, she trailed off, unsure of what to say next. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. I know. You didn't come into this expecting anything. But I want you to know that whatever happens, you're not alone in this. I'm here for you, Emily. There it was again. The warmth in his voice, the promise of something more. Emily had no idea what to do with it, but she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. They had been through so much together already, even if it was all part of a deal, and now, things were starting to shift in a way she hadn't anticipated. The next few days were filled with tension. Emily spent more time at Daniel's mansion, but each moment felt like a tug-of-war between the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. Her relationship with Daniel had started as a contract, a means to an end. But now, every look, every word, every quiet moment between them felt like it was building towards something deeper. She found herself wondering if he felt the same. Was he beginning to care for her as more than just his wife on paper? Or was this all just part of his guilt, his way of doing the right thing? Emily didn't know, but the uncertainty was becoming unbearable. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the city, the silence between them was heavy. Daniel was looking out over the skyline, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the city lights, and Emily felt her heart racing. She had to ask him. She had to know if what she was feeling was real, or if she was just imagining things. Daniel, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Are we still pretending? Or is this something else now? Daniel turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, he took her hand in his. I'm not pretending, he said softly. I know this started as a deal, and I know you're doing this for your mother, but I'm not pretending, Emily. I care about you. I want to be with you. His words hit her like a jolt of electricity. She felt her pulse quicken, her breath catch in her throat. He wasn't pretending. And suddenly, everything she had been holding back came rushing forward. The emotions she had tried to ignore, the feelings she had buried deep inside, were all rising to the surface. She wasn't sure what to do with them, but she couldn't deny that they were there, raw and real. I care about you too, she whispered, the words escaping her lips before she could stop them. But I don't know if I can, if I'm ready for this. Daniel squeezed her hand, his gaze soft and understanding. You don't have to be ready, Emily. We can take things slow, but I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. In that moment, Emily realized that everything had changed. She had come into this marriage to save her mother, but somewhere along the way, she had found something she hadn't expected, a chance at real love, with a man who cared about her in ways she never thought possible. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still challenges to face, decisions to make, and secrets to uncover. And Emily knew that whatever happened next, she couldn't go back to the way things were. She was ready to face whatever came her way, as long as she wasn't doing it alone. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind. Emily's mind was clouded with so many emotions she wasn't sure how to process them. Daniel's confession had thrown her off balance, and while part of her wanted to embrace the possibility of love, another part of her screamed that it was too soon, too complicated. The agreement they had made was still hanging over them, and her initial reason for being with him, her mother's health, hadn't changed. Her mother's condition was still dire, and no matter what, Emily had to keep that as her priority. But the more time she spent with Daniel, the more she found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't expected. She had started out as a stranger, bound by a contract, but now she was becoming someone who was beginning to care for him. Really care. That terrified her. She had always believed in taking the practical route, in doing what was necessary, but now she was facing something that wasn't so easily calculated. One evening, as she sat in the living room of Daniel's penthouse, flipping through medical bills, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother's doctor, asking for an urgent meeting. Emily's heart sank as she read the message, and she immediately knew what it meant. The situation was getting worse. She had to go. Daniel, who had been sitting across from her, noticed the change in her expression and immediately stood up. What's wrong? He asked, concern written all over his face. Emily hesitated for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. It's my mom, she said softly. I have to go meet the doctor. It's not good. Daniel's eyes softened, and without saying a word, he moved toward her. He gently took her hand in his, offering comfort without needing to speak. I'm coming with you, he said, his voice steady. Emily was taken aback. She hadn't expected that. You don't have to, she started, but Daniel shook his head. I want to. Let me be there for you, Emily. You don't have to do this alone. Her heart swelled at his words, but she still hesitated. This wasn't the plan. She had always done everything alone, always carried the weight of responsibility by herself. But something in Daniel's eyes told her that he was serious, that he wasn't just offering help out of obligation. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she wasn't alone in her struggle. She nodded, her throat tight with emotion, and together, they left the penthouse. The drive to the hospital was silent, but not uncomfortable. Daniel's presence next to her was reassuring, and Emily couldn't help but feel the tension in her chest slowly begin to ease. She was grateful for him, more than she could put into words. When they arrived at the hospital, Emily's heart raced as they walked through the sterile, quiet halls. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of her mother. She hadn't told Daniel everything. He didn't know how dire the situation truly was, how little time her mother had left. The doctor was waiting for them in a small office. His expression was serious, and Emily felt a knot form in her stomach as they sat down. Ms. Davis, the doctor began, his voice gentle but firm. I'm afraid the treatment isn't working. Your mother's condition is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. At this stage, we need to consider other options. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had known this was coming, but hearing the words spoken out loud was a reality she wasn't ready to face. She felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. Daniel reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. "What are our options?" he asked, his voice calm but urgent. The doctor sighed, his eyes filled with empathy. "At this point, it's about comfort care. We can make her as comfortable as possible, but beyond that, there's little more we can do." Emily's heart shattered. She had fought so hard, had done everything she could to save her mother, but it felt like she was losing her. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over, and she let out a shaky breath. Daniel stood up and moved around the table, kneeling beside her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and steady. "I'm so sorry, Emily," he said quietly. "I know this isn't easy, but you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here, and I always will be." Emily looked up at him, her vision blurry with tears. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She wasn't alone. And in that moment, she realized something she hadn't before. She had found something in Daniel that went beyond the contract, beyond the arrangement. She had found someone who truly cared. After the meeting, they left the hospital, the weight of the news heavy between them. But Emily felt a small sense of relief knowing that she wasn't facing it alone anymore. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future held. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what was to come. Daniel had shown her that love, in its most unexpected form, had the power to heal, even when everything else seemed lost. She didn't have to face the uncertainty alone. Together, they would figure it out. The days that followed were heavy, filled with the kind of stillness that only comes when you are waiting for something you cannot control. Emily tried to keep herself together, but every glance at her mother, every phone call with the doctor, reminded her that time was running out. Daniel continued to be there for her, a quiet presence at her side. His support was unwavering, and for the first time in weeks, Emily began to realize that she had been wrong about him. He wasn't just the man she had agreed to marry for her mother's sake. He was someone who truly cared, and that thought unsettled her. How had she let herself get so close to him? How had everything changed so quickly? As Emily watched Daniel, sitting silently beside her mother's hospital bed, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of guilt and gratitude. Guilt because this marriage, this arrangement, was never supposed to lead to this. Feelings, connection, real care. Gratitude because Daniel had shown up when she needed someone the most. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, his voice soft but steady as he reached for her hand. Emily looked at him, her chest tight, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. How could she explain what she was feeling? The weight of her responsibilities, the growing feelings she had for him, the uncertainty of everything that lay ahead. "I'm fine," she said, her voice hoarse. I just don't know what to do anymore." Daniel didn't say anything at first. He just held her hand and let her speak. "I thought I could handle this. I thought I could do everything on my own. But now, I don't know how to keep going." Emily's words broke the dam she had been holding up for so long, and suddenly, she was crying, not just for her mother, but for herself, for everything she had sacrificed, for all the walls she had built around her heart. Daniel didn't flinch at her tears. Instead, he wrapped his arms around her and held her tightly, letting her cry. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here for you, Emily. You don't have to carry this weight on your own. I'll help you through it, no matter what happens." His words, so simple, yet so sincere, broke through the walls Emily had built around her heart. She had always prided herself on being independent, on being strong for her family. But in this moment, she realized that it wasn't weakness to need someone. It was human. And for the first time, she allowed herself to let someone in. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, decisions, and constant worry. But Daniel was there, through it all. They sat together, they talked, and they even shared quiet moments of peace amid the chaos. Emily couldn't remember the last time she had felt this calm, this grounded. It was as if Daniel's presence had become a tether, something that kept her from floating away into the overwhelming uncertainty of it all. But even as they spent more time together, Emily kept reminding herself that this was temporary. This was still a marriage of convenience, and no matter how much she cared for him, she had to remember why they were here in the first place. Her mother's health, the contract they had made, the promise she had made to herself and her family. And yet, as the days went on, Emily couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward Daniel. Every time he smiled at her, every time he said something kind, her heart skipped a beat. But there was no room for love here. There was only room for duty. That was the story she had been telling herself. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had already begun to fall for him. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks one evening, as they sat in the living room of the mansion. Daniel had just returned from a business trip, and Emily was sitting on the couch, reading a book. He walked in, dropped his bag, and smiled at her. "How's your mom?" he asked, his voice warm. "She's stable," Emily said, her voice soft. "She's resting right now. The doctors are hopeful, but," she trailed off. Daniel sat beside her, his presence familiar and comforting. "You're doing everything you can," he said gently. Emily shook her head, tears welling up again. "I don't know anymore," she whispered. "I don't know what else to do. I just want her to be okay." Daniel placed a hand on hers, his touch grounding her. "She will be," he said quietly. "And you'll be okay too, Emily. You've been through so much, but you're strong, and I believe in you." The sincerity in his voice, the warmth of his touch, broke down the last of her defenses. For the first time in a long time, Emily allowed herself to lean into the feeling of being cared for, of not having to do everything alone. And in that moment, she realized something else. She didn't just need him for her mother's sake. She needed him because he had become someone important to her. But she didn't know how to face that truth. How could she reconcile the feelings she had for him with the promises she had made? And would he ever feel the same way? All she could do was wait. But one thing was clear. Her life was about to change in a way she hadn't anticipated. The days following their quiet moment in the living room seemed to stretch on, each one heavier than the last. Emily tried to push aside the growing emotions she had for Daniel, but the more time they spent together, the harder it became. She found herself thinking about him constantly, wondering if he felt the same way or if he was simply being kind because of the arrangement they had made. Her heart was caught in a whirlwind of uncertainty, and she knew she couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Emily stood by the window of the penthouse, looking out at the view. The distant lights twinkled below, and the world seemed peaceful, yet her heart felt anything but calm. She had spent so much time thinking about what was best for her mother, about the deal she had made with Daniel, but now she was faced with the truth. She had started to care for him in ways that went beyond the agreement. It was terrifying. She had never expected this, never wanted it. But there it was, undeniable. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. "Emily." It was Daniel's voice, gentle and familiar. She turned, startled by the sound of his voice, and quickly wiped away the stray tears that had fallen without her noticing. "I'm here," she said, her voice catching slightly. The door opened, and Daniel stepped inside. He looked at her with concern in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, though she felt anything but. "I'm fine," she lied, offering him a small smile. But Daniel wasn't fooled. He walked toward her, his gaze never leaving her face. "You don't have to lie to me, Emily," he said quietly, his voice filled with understanding. "I know something's bothering you." The weight of his words settled heavily on her chest, and for a moment, Emily didn't know what to say. She had always kept her emotions to herself, but this time, it felt like the walls were crumbling down. She started, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to do anymore. I came into this with one goal in mind, to help my mother, but now, everything's changing." Daniel reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "Emily, you don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice sincere. "You don't have to carry this burden on your own. I'm here for you, no matter what happens." His words were like a balm to her soul, soothing the raw edges of her fear and uncertainty. She had been so afraid of letting herself feel anything for him, of getting too close, but now, standing here with him, she realized how much she needed him. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not." Daniel stepped closer, his hand still holding hers, and looked deep into her eyes. "You don't have to pretend, Emily," he said softly. "You don't have to be strong all the time. I'm not asking you to do everything on your own." Emily's heart ached at the tenderness in his voice. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable, but now, with him, it felt like it was okay to be. "I don't know what this is between us," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know where it's going, but I can't ignore what I'm feeling anymore. Daniel's expression softened, and he gently cupped her face with his free hand. Neither can I, he said quietly. What we have is real, Emily. It's not just a deal, not just an arrangement. It's something more. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Emily didn't know if she could believe him. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the truth in them, the sincerity that she had been searching for. I've been scared, she whispered, her voice breaking. Scared of letting myself care about you, scared of what it means. Daniel's thumb brushed over her cheek, wiping away a tear. I know, he said softly, but you don't have to be scared. I'm not going anywhere, Emily. Whatever this is, whatever we have, we'll figure it out together. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of his touch wash over her. She had spent so long holding herself back, but now, with him, she was starting to realize that it was okay to let go. The world outside seemed to fade as she stepped closer to him, her heart pounding in her chest. I don't know what happens next, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. But I know that I don't want to lose this. Daniel smiled, his eyes full of tenderness. You won't, he promised, his voice steady and sure. I'm not letting go either. And as they stood there, together, Emily finally allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that with Daniel by her side, she didn't have to face it alone. Weeks passed, and as Emily's mother continued to improve, so did her relationship with Daniel. What had started as a marriage of convenience was slowly evolving into something far deeper, far more meaningful. Emily had allowed herself to open up to him, to trust him in a way she had never trusted anyone before. The more time they spent together, the more she realized that her feelings for him weren't just the result of their arrangement, but something real, something she could no longer deny. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of his penthouse, Daniel took her hand in his thumb gently tracing the back of her hand. Emily, he began, his voice soft, but filled with sincerity. I've been thinking about us, about everything. I know this all started as a deal, but somewhere along the way, I fell for you. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she turned to look at him. She hadn't expected him to say those words, and yet, deep down, she had been waiting for them. I know we've had our doubts, our fears, he continued, but I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I want to be with you. For real, Emily. No more pretending. No more contracts. Emily felt a lump form in her throat as her emotions overwhelmed her. She had never allowed herself to believe that something like this could happen. Something real, something pure, especially not after all the heartache she had been through. But now, with Daniel, she could see a future. She could see a life filled with love and hope, not just for her mother's health, but for her own happiness. She had been scared, so scared of what this all meant, but now she knew that what they shared wasn't a mistake. It was a beginning. I love you, Emily whispered, the words barely leaving her lips, but the sincerity behind them was undeniable. Daniel's face softened, and without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I love you too, he murmured into her hair. I've always loved you, even before I knew it myself. For a moment, they just held each other, the world outside fading away as they found comfort in each other's presence. Emily had never imagined that a marriage that had started with so many strings attached, so much uncertainty, could transform into something so pure. But in Daniel, she had found more than she could have ever asked for. She had found love, trust, and someone who would stand by her no matter what. As they pulled apart, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Emily's breath caught in her throat as he opened it to reveal a delicate ring, sparkling under the soft lights of the balcony. Emily, Daniel said, his voice shaky with emotion. Will you marry me? Not because of the contract, but because of everything we've become together? Will you be mine, not just in name, but in heart? Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she looked at him, her heart swelling with love. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling. Yes, I will marry you. Daniel's face lit up with a smile as he slid the ring onto her finger, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt like everything was falling into place. It wasn't just about her mother anymore. It was about her, about them, and the future they would build together. As they embraced, Emily knew that this was only the beginning. Their love had been forged in the most unexpected of circumstances, but now, it was the foundation of everything they had. They had both come into this marriage with doubts, with baggage, but now, they were free to move forward, together. Their journey wasn't over, but Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them side by side. In Daniel, she had found more than she could have ever dreamed of. She had found a partner, a love, and a home. And with that, Emily realized that sometimes, life's most beautiful moments come from the most unexpected places. They had both found something worth fighting for, something that was theirs, and no one could take that away. Their future, their love, had only just begun.